This is the first one. At some point in your lives, somebody, either a partner, a friend, a spouse, is going to ask you to go to some social event, and you're the only economist or financial economist there. And you'll get into a conversation with somebody who will say, how many courses are you teaching at the moment? And you'll say, well, I taught last semester, I've done my stuff, so. And they'll look at you and they say, well, what do you do? If you're not teaching, what do you do? And this is one of those questions that comes up again and again and again. And it's amazing for people who don't do anything. We tend to be busy all the time. And time management is very, very difficult because this never ends. So there are actually three things that I think you do. I think you create knowledge, you teach others what you know, and you help others. So the creating knowledge is basically, you're researchers. You are scientific researchers who are aiming to understand something about this complex world, in particular the economy that drives our wealth and our prosperity, and try to basically understand mechanisms, how they work. You can understand them theoretically, you can understand them empirically, or even best if you use both tools. The way that we keep score to decide whether or not this is a good idea, whether or not lots of people know the idea, is through the publication process. But to some extent, the thing that you're trying to do is create ideas. The check mark, yes, this was proofed, double proofed, we think it's true, we think it's reasonable, that's publication. But the main thing is to create ideas. Very, very important. So I guess where I'm going with this is having many publications is a great thing, but you want to have many publications that basically reflect some sort of creative input, not redoing what somebody else has done, basically something that doesn't represent an intellectual push forward. You really want to go for quality, because in the long run, there are people that we know that have multiple publications, but unless they provided something, an insight that people at some point said, hey, that's kind of interesting, it'll die. It'll drift away and die. And you want to create those new ideas. So this is extremely important. The other thing that you want to do is you want to teach people what you know. So there's the teaching that we get remunerated for, which is MBA teaching. So the argument is that the reason why finance salaries are spectacularly high is not because of the outside Wall Street option, but the fact that we teach MBAs. Which should give you some sense of the marginal cost of this activity. And that's an important part of it, right? I mean, to some extent, when you think about, what is an MBA? An MBA is somebody who's going to go into industry. These guys will be deciding what your phone plan looks like. These guys will be deciding whether or not they're going to provide money to somebody who is going to invent something that may save your life in 20 years. You really want to have a class of educated professionals who understand the basics of the economy and the basics of finance and how markets work. So there is an important aspect to MBA teaching beyond I have to get it right and I have to sort of fulfill my obligations. At some point socially, we want to have educated people who are in charge of the economy, otherwise horrible things happen. Sometimes horrible things happen even when educated people are in charge of the economy. Just imagine how bad it would be if nobody knew anything. So that's teaching. The other sort of teaching that you do is by talking to your colleagues. You can talk to your colleagues in a business school. Business schools are strange ecosystems. We have finance guys who have technical knowledge. We have economists. We have sociologists. We have psychologists. All these people you can learn from, but you can also basically explain things to them. You can explain how markets work. You can explain the sort of issues that you think are important. 9 times out of 10, these will be discussions that you have over lunch that won't lead anywhere. But 10% of the time, somebody will say, hey, in my literature, we've thought about that, and we've thought about that in a slightly different way. Sometimes those conversations, even if they're interesting and provocative, lead nowhere, but sometimes they lead to what is essentially intellectual arbitrage. Okay, another field, psychology, has thought about how decision-making works. Well, let me see if I can import that into what I view of what financial markets do, how information is aggregated. Maybe I can learn something from these other disciplines. So I would encourage you to basically talk about your research to people outside finance. You also have to talk about your research to people inside finance, both your colleagues the very senior colleagues at your school, and your sort of immediate cohort. You want to speak to your senior colleagues at school because they're busy. They're busy people. They're interested in you, they want to help, but they're really busy. And so if you can provide information to people in a way that's very, very easy for them to assimilate, they're more likely to remember it, they're more likely to basically keep an eye out, and they're more likely to say to one of their friends, oh, hey, we've got this new young person who's doing something interesting along these lines. That helps you. You want to talk to people who are in your cohort, because this is where your co-authors are going to come from. Unfortunately, even if you write with senior people and you do a huge amount of, a huge intellectual contribution to the joint project, the way the world works is, you're writing with Farmer. I wonder who was the intellectual driver of that. I mean, he could have been running your regressions in Excel, and you tell it what to do. But basically, the world will never believe that. It will always be you or his research assistant. So in terms of co-authorship, yes, sometimes write with senior people. You'll learn something if they have a skill that you're interested in or they know a literature. But really focus your attention on your immediate cohort. 1 or 2 years around you. These are the people you can learn from. These are the people that you can actually have a very open communication with and write successfully with. To some extent, a co-author is somebody that you can say intensely stupid things to and they don't laugh. And that's just great. Because the way that we generate new ideas is to say something stupid and somebody will say, I don't think so, and then we think of a new idea. So it's really, really important to have that sort of level of trust, and that typically comes with people who are on your level, right? Not above. The other thing that's sort of important about teaching is having almost like elevator spiels. What are you working on? You should be able to communicate in less than a paragraph what your major sort of research thrust at the moment is. You should be able to communicate it at a level that basically your parents will understand. You should be able to succinctly, communicate why your ideas are important. Something that takes multiple paragraphs, this, that, and the other, qualifications, this doesn't help. You want to be able to basically provide sort of little flags that people can have in the back of their brain that they dig up when they want to get somebody who's working on a particular topic. This works for editors. This works for people who are, want to work in an area. They want to know who's doing what. They want to know all these things. If you can just communicate very, very briefly what you're doing, and so people can retain it, and you want to disseminate this information broadly. Even if you're not on a program, consider going to conferences that basically deal with information or ideas that you're interested in. Go, talk to people. Go to, WFA, AFA, all those big conferences, also the small boutique ones where you can actually talk and you don't get sort of flooded by a sea of humanity. Right? Go to things where, just anywhere there are people who might generally be interested in the areas that you want to talk about are congregating. Seek them out and corner them in elevators and tell them what you're doing. What else about teaching? Yeah, that's about it, I would say. The last thing that I think is important is helping people to do their work. What does this mean? This means be a good referee. You get an editor sends you a letter saying, write a referee report. Say yes. You say yes because you learned something. Somebody else has spent a huge amount of time putting this piece of work together, and you can see their thought process in their clearly written paper, and that'll tell you something about the literature. So you learn something. You also move the body of knowledge forward. Right? You basically know what you know, you find out what they know, and you think about it and you say, okay, does that move our knowledge forward? So this really, really helps you to sort of understand how different ideas fit together and how the process works of just everything moving forward. The other thing that's very important to do to help people is to, whenever you're asked, be willing to discuss papers at conferences. To some extent, discussing is more difficult than presenting, because if you're presenting, you know what you're doing, and basically this is the paper. With discussions, you're in front of people, so you're really exposed, and you're basically talking about something that you've spent a couple of days trying to understand, but you probably don't know it as well as the author. But it's really, really important because, if you're discussing a paper, you're essentially telling people what you find interesting about the paper, what you find novel about the paper. And if you think about, what a good paper is, a good paper is essentially providing somebody an idea that they didn't have before. Okay? If you know nothing, you can come up with a new idea and think, oh, that's great. Whether or not the community at large will accept something, basically the community at large has to think that this was a new idea. So the way that you sort of work through that is by discussing other people's papers and find out what other people are working on, because then you can clearly identify something that people don't know. And that's a good paper, an innovative paper. So discussing is difficult, but it's very, very useful. It helps you along. Finally, the last group of people that I would say that you have to talk to and help. Sorry, were you about to? You're doing your time thing? Okay.
No.
Regulators, okay? Policymakers. Also people who are in the industry. Finance, we are to some extent, not a strict subset, but somewhat of a subset of economics. But we are the closest to practice. And it's really, we saw with the crisis, when you talk to people at the SEC, pretty much a large part of the Washington apparatus is trying to make sure financial markets work in a clear and transparent way. One could argue that this is one of the strengths of this country, right? The financial markets are so deep and they function so well. So if you have some sort of insight or understanding that you think is important for policy, don't wait to be asked. Send somebody at the SEC an email. Basically communicate with them. These guys might not respond immediately, but you really want to get your work out there. The Journal of Finance is a fantastic outlet, but that is not the final place that research should stop. If it sort of reflects what's happening in the world, the research should actually have policy implications and much larger implications than simply a publication. So this is very, very important. Okay, so this is my last slide. And this is just enjoy yourselves. To some extent, being an academic is a nightmare. You get no positive reinforcement. You work for years, and then finally a paper comes out, and 5 people read it. And then, you do the same, and it just keeps on repeating. You never get this sort of constant stream of affirmation. So you've got to enjoy what you're doing. You have to be slightly obsessive about the topics that you're pursuing. You can't be pursuing them because you think it would lead to a publication. You have to pursue them because, you know what? If I'm going to spend 2 days in my pajamas working on something, I want to be doing this. And we're one of the very few professions where we have this opportunity of doing that. It's fantastic. We can direct what we do with our time. Other people start at 9, even if they go to 8, 10 o'clock. Typically, other people are telling them what to work on. We've just got blue skies. We can go anywhere we want to. So really enjoy it, even though it's horrific most of the time.